Hey, welcome back to the Philosophy for Philistines channel in this alternative universe we call Canada. I'll make reference to yesterday's podcast, just review that a bit so that we can frame what I have to say today. From yesterday's podcast, the phrase know thyself was not invented by Socrates. Rather, it was the motto inscribed on the frontispiece of the Temple of Delphi. This assertion, imperative in its form, indicates that man must stand and live according to his nature. Man must look at himself, into himself, but to find what and by what means. These two questions are fundamental. First, as to the what. Indeed, this invitation to introspection must be connected to the Platonic theory of reminiscence. Everyone, says Socrates, has knowledge itself, but just must remember. Knowledge is inherent in man, not outside of him. Wisdom, however, is learning to recollect. Then as to the how. The knowledge of oneself can be achieved only through the Socratic method, that is to say, the dialogue between the soul and the self, or between a student and his teacher. Socrates often acted in the role of a questioner, as an attendant emotional. Socrates questions because he knows nothing, knows he knows nothing, has nothing to learn. However, he can help his followers to discover the truths they have within themselves. Without this work on ourselves, life is worthless, according to Socrates. Hence his axiom, an unexamined life is not worth living. This is, of course, reflected in Jungian psychology and his, what he called the process of individuation and of coming to terms with our collective and personal unconscious. And of course, to Jung, that is where the great archetypes lie, the things that define how humanity must conduct itself. And it's why Jung asserted that the process of individuation occurred on a very personal level by coming to terms with your own personal and collective unconscious. His philosophy, that is that of Socrates, does not mean, as it does with the sophists, the acquisition of knowledge. Rather, it is a way of questioning, to challenge, a form of self-concern and self-inquiry. Partly due to the influence of Plato and Aristotle, the term sophistry has come to signify the deliberate use of fallacious reasoning, intellectual charlatanism, and moral unscrupulousness. So let's examine the sophistry of Justin Trudeau, who in one short day completely contradicted himself in a news conference for the entire world to see, where he revoked the invocation of the Emergency Measures Act. When less than 24 hours prior, he had insisted these measures were necessary, in spite of the fact that protesters and their vehicles had already been cleared out of the city core. In fact, it is more difficult to travel downtown now than it was when the convoy was present, because the authorities have set up random roadblocks stopping legitimate traffic to inquire of the drivers where their vehicles are headed. No illegal inquiry, search and seizure are allowed under English common law. Therefore, the police do not have proper legal grounds to stop vehicles and inquire as to their destination. Moreover, within that same time frame, Trudeau held another news conference where he claimed to stand with the rights of the Ukraine to defend itself against Russian incursion, and therefore he is sending our troops to their aid. This in spite of the fact that the part of the Ukraine in question is rife with separatists who side with Russia. Media outlets all over the world, as well as consuls and embassies, have issued statements denouncing Trudeau's hypocrisy because he had the unmitigated gall to state that he will defend the rights of Ukrainians while crushing civil liberties here in Canada, even as bank accounts remain frozen and peaceful protesters remain in jail without bail. I have often asserted, and I will do so again, our crisis of conscience, for that is what it is not a political problem. Rather, it is a moral, philosophical, and spiritual one. I am almost 69 years old. I was born late in my parents' lives. I have a long window into the past. My grandparents were born in the 1880s, and my great-grandfather in the 1820s. I know with absolute certainty what moral and spiritual values were a fundamental aspect of how they made value judgments about their leaders. They would never have tolerated political leaders who behaved in such a reprehensible and immoral manner. And this observation certainly does not mean that their leaders from bygone times were perfect. They simply were not as blatantly authoritarian and hypocritical as Justin Trudeau, whose hubris is so enormous that he is incapable of self-examination. He is the living example of an unexamined life not worth living. But wait, why do many Canadians not see this? The only conclusion that I can draw is that many have never examined the actual motives for their own behavior. And I have two things to say about that. Firstly, when you examine yourself, you will quickly conclude that no one is qualified or wise enough to arbitrarily attempt to control the lives of others, which is why you will never hear nor read of me climbing up on my moral high horse. Therefore, I have less than no desire to control the lives of others or take from them what is not mine to take. And secondly, those who live unexamined lives are invariably those who would use the full force of the state to issue arbitrary dictates to others, which in fact infringe on our personal autonomy and legally guaranteed civil liberties. Until this nation can carefully examine its own moral deceitfulness, to examine the hypocrisy of Trudeau's sophistry, replete as it is with blatantly contradictory rhetoric, our civil liberties, the maintenance of the rule of law, and upholding charter rights will be impossible. If we allow this sad situation to continue, the Dominion of Canada will have been lost to its own foolishness and hubris. Yes, the sophistry of Justin Trudeau's government exemplifies the deliberate use of fallacious reasoning, intellectual charlatanism, and moral unscrupulousness so obvious only an unexamining fool could miss it, which makes me seriously wonder how people choose to remain so ignorant of their own foibles. I dare to examine myself. I invite you to do the same. We must pray about this situation because just because the Emergency Measures Act has been revoked, it doesn't mean that the very circumstances that led to it and the very fact that it was passed in Parliament doesn't present an ongoing threat to the democratic integrity of this nation. God bless you all. Have a great day.